Welcome to Stories Behind the Stories. This is Historical Romance Edition, and I am so excited to have with me today two best-selling authors. In fact, they're many times bestsellers, and we have with us Celeste Barclay and Lauren Smith. Hi, ladies. Thank you for being here. I am so looking forward to getting into this topic of historical romance novels and not only what it takes to write a novel and all of the work that you do that goes into it, but the amazing outcome because I love your stories. And you both write some of the most compelling characters in some of the most interesting settings and eras, the time. And so if you would take just a minute, Celeste, we'll start with you and just very briefly, because we're going to get into a lot of details later, briefly introduce yourself to our audience.
Well, I'm Celeste Barclay, and under that name, I write Highlanders, Pirates, Vikings, and a little bit of Regency. I do also write Mafia Romance as Sabine Barclay, but I began 8 years ago. I stumbled into this. It was never an aspiration. It was one story that I wanted to tell, and then there were five others in that series that I was like, yeah, I'm liking this. Let's do this. And now 40 historical romances later and 30 mafia books later, this is my full-time job. So I did not intend for this to happen, but I'm so glad and so fortunate that it did.
And that's because readers love your book. 70.
Yeah.
If I'm adding correctly, that is 70 books in 8 years. Wow,
Yes.
that's
Yep.
amazing. And
I like what
so,
I do.
yeah, I can tell. I can tell. And so, Lauren, you have a sort of similar journey. Do you want to tell us a
Yeah,
little
I'm
bit about
Lauren
you?
Smith, and I write basically every subgenre of romance under Lauren Smith, but I have a lot of historicals, Regencies, Victorians, pirates. Someday I'd love to add Vikings and Westerns to that as well. So, yeah, I've been writing for about, I think it's January of 2014 is when I started.
So you've been doing it for 12 years, correct? And it's amazing that to me the output that you have, both of you, and how readers have just sort of eaten up these novels. And so I want to start by talking a little bit about what it is with historical romance. Well, in fact, you know what? I'll start by telling you what I love about historical romance. And then I want you to tell me what you readers are telling you that they love about your books. But to me, it's being taken to another place and time, and and the way that you describe the settings and the things that people, it's so interesting, the things that people did in different times, different eras, and how they handled things. In fact, I just watched an entire, I can't believe I did this, an entire hour-long podcast about how people in medieval times had sex. And because because nine people in a family would live in a one room cabin or croft, and so they had sex a lot out in the field. And I mean, I was just, oh, who ever thought of that? And so it's just one thing after another like that about what it was like to live in a different time, which always makes me appreciate the fact that I'm here and now. And then the romantic love story, and you begin to understand that the love story is a love story is a love story, no matter where you are. And so that's what I find compelling about historical romance. In fact, later on, I'm going to show you the very first one I ever read from 1986. It's all turned yellow, but I'll show it to you. Oh, have you got one?
Well, let me see. I can't reach it right this minute, but I will in a little bit.
Okay,
So,
all right.
to
So
see.
So, Lauren, let's start with you. What is it that readers do you think? What are readers telling you they love about this genre?
I think it's the timeless feel, like the idea that love and passion can be found in any era of time. I think it goes back to, and as someone who's a history major and obsesses over, like, I do like to be historically accurate, but at the same time, even though women back then weren't treated great, like as far as property laws and other stuff, there was a level of gentility and respect for them that we don't have now. So it's like two sides of the same coin. You know, now we can vote, but men are jerks to us. And back then it's like they opened the doors and laid coats down, you know, so we could walk over puddles, but at the same time we couldn't vote, you know. So I think there's kind of that attraction of, with at least with romance, we get to see sort of the more beautiful side of the past, where women were treated differently and a little more with proper reverence, you know, for the fact that we were, you know, not because we were necessarily delicate, but I think back then they understood that women died a lot more in childbirth, and there was kind of a lot more, in some ways, by good men. There was respect, and when I talk about men, I usually mean good men. There was respect for that, the fact that, you know, women were, you know, something to be valued and were precious. And I think we've lost a little bit of that now. Again, good men, I always say good men, feel like that now. And I think that readers like the idea of dressing up, going to balls, and having somebody treat you wonderfully, like kind of like that fairy tale feel. It's sort of like modern day fairy tales in a way. When they're reading historical romance, they have that chance to go back and step into a time period which we know in reality wouldn't have been that great, but it's fun to go back and look at what might have been really fun. Might have been nice for like a minute. Like we wouldn't want to live in that time period, I don't think, but it's fun to pretend. And I think it's like that fantasy element where it's like it's a recognizable era of history, so you're not having to worry about wizards or dragons and all that stuff. So that it's rules and a place they understand from a place of history, but it can still feel like a fantasy.
I love that. And you said it's the beautiful part of the past, recognizing that it wasn't all like that. But this is the beautiful part of it. Celeste?
Yeah, to piggyback on that, I think it's the escapism with the potential that you could be that person. And before I started writing historicals, or sorry, mafia, I really wasn't that into contemporary because in my head I was like, I'm never going to have a billionaire come and swoop in with a helicopter. I'm never going to have these yacht getaways. I'm
Oh
never going to
no,
have
it's not
all
going to
these
happen? Oh, yeah.
things. Yeah. And so I was like, this is kind of demoralizing, but I can picture myself back in a historical setting because maybe that could have been me. And so I think that
Oh.
potential for, being able to put themselves into these romances that pull the best of those time periods and the selective reality that is romance across the board appeals to people. And like you said at the beginning, Linda, this potential for visiting a time period that's not our own and to be able to see how things were back then, there's a lot of appeal to that. And then I also think that there's a very innate connection to various diasporas that I think, is sort of that epigenetic soul of folks of wanting to know where they came from and what their folks were like before they reached modern day or modern location. And so I believe that that's largely part of it. And I'm a former history teacher, among other things. And so the accuracy is really important to me without writing curriculum, which I did and no longer do. And I think that those, the nitty gritty of it that we're able to weave into it gives it that authenticity and that validity that in some cases contemporary romance doesn't always have because you're living and breathing it. So you don't necessarily need that woven into the story the same way you would these details that are, unrelatable in a lot of ways.
I love what you said about it's our history, and it takes us back to the possibility of how some of our ancestors may have lived.
Mhm,
And I truly believe that's part of us, that
mhm.
somewhere it's ingrained deeply within us that all of these people existed in those times. And it's just so fascinating to me to think about that. It's so grounding to think about what it was like for them and the possibilities. I love that. So you mentioned the research that you do, you're making it accurate. Do you do a lot of research? Do both of you do a lot of research for your stories? Or do you just make it up as you go?
I don't know about you, Lauren, but I suspect it's similar that there's quite a lot of research done. You know, the more you write in a particular time period, the more it just becomes internalized. And so you're not researching the same things over and over again. It becomes what you need specifically for that story. So for example, with my Highlanders, I write 14th century. I write the Wars of Scottish Independence, Robert the Bruce. There's a lot of information that has become internalized for me. And now, mind you, my mom is English. So all the English, well, I should say British history that I read was definitely written by the English. So when I started writing Highlanders, I had to relearn all that history from the Scottish perspective. And I was like, those dastardly English. I am one of those dastardly English. So, you know, there's stuff that I did have to relearn different perspective, but now it becomes the clan conflicts. If I want to match up these clans either as allies or rivals, what historical events and details can I pull in? But my working knowledge of the various time periods in which I write, I don't need to revisit. It really becomes what is specific to that book.
Hmm. That makes sense. Yeah. Lauren, do you do research?
Yeah, I agree with everything Celeste said, in that, you get comfortable with, like, for me, the Regency I was most comfortable with. And so everything is kind of second nature. The only things I tend to kind of look up these days are, I'm like, oh, I need a new kind of dress. Let me look up some different gowns. Let me look up some different waistcoat patterns for men, or, sometimes I like have to refresh my mind on carriages and what certain carriages can do, because there's different sizes and styles. And but I have kind of like my go-to research notebooks and like workshops that I've saved in digital files. So it's kind of like I can do like a little quick glance back. Or if I you need something unique, like I had a book that was called The Gentleman's Seduction, and it involved the Frost Fair, which is one of the last times that the actual Thames River in England froze over. And I found that really fascinating, because they like brought an elephant out onto the ice, and then they like set up like skating rinks and like little booths to sell food and like merchandise and stuff. And they had like an actual fair on the river. And I remember thinking, like, this is so crazy. I can't even believe this is real. And so I put that in the book, and I was reading all about it to make sure that I got it right, and that way I could talk about it with readers. So that was kind of like a unique little rabbit trail I go down every now and then for some books. But like Celeste said, it's a lot of it's just second nature. When you just read it enough, it's like you're studying it every day, and you kind of become a professor in it a little bit.
I love
Absolutely.
it. They had I'm still stuck on they had an elephant on the ice on the Thames. Okay. Whatever. Yeah, that's fascinating. And this is totally an aside, but Celeste writes Highlander books, and Lauren, you have such pretty red hair. Are you Scottish? Is that your heritage?
Yeah, I'm actually. So the funny thing is, this was the color my hair was when I was first born, and it was like my color all the way through about second grade, and then I went to like I naturally turned into like a stark blonde, and then when hormones kicked in, of course, all the lovely colors of my real hair went like in middle school turned to like this mousy gray. So of course I went to blonde for a little bit, because that was like the whole thing in like the 2000s. And then as I got older, I was like, oh, I need to switch back to actual red because it looks better with my skin. And it was like actually what it was supposed to be. And I never thought I was Scottish. And we were doing DNA. And then my grandmother or my mom said, well, your great great grandmother was a full blown Scot off the ship from, and she went to Nova Scotia, then moved to Nebraska. And I went, what? So we did our DNA. And of course, we're like 30% or 40% H and Scott. So I was like, all right, this is good. It makes a lot more sense, because I thought I was just mostly British, and I thought I was German, but apparently our German ancient ancestry. So like what a lot of people don't understand is they think it's ancestry from like 200 years ago. It's actually ancient DNA that they test against, like 5 to 10,000 year DNA. And
Right.
so I bet basically was ancient British, not ancient German. Even so, I was just modern German, but it was Brits that had moved over to Germany, and then so yeah, so
I
mostly Brit and
love it.
Scott apparently.
I love these heritage stories, and I know this is an aside too, but Celeste, just quickly, what's your heritage?
So I'm half Moroccan, half English. My dad is Moroccan and my mom is English. So I was born in Morocco. We immigrated to the States when I was a baby, but all of my family on both sides are back in my motherland. So they're there's no one here but me. Basically, I do have a couple of cousins in other parts of the States and Canada, but that's it.
So you go back to England. I've heard you talk about going back to England. You go back to Morocco?
Yes, I do. My parents have retired back there, so they live
Oh,
there now full time. I do try and make a trip there at least once a year, usually beginning of summer. This year, I'm not fuel shortages. It's really kind of cramping my style for my summer plans, to be honest. But I am headed to the UK in 21 days. So I will be spending most of the summer there. I've got about a month in Scotland, a few weeks in England, and possibly a trip to France as well. So yeah,
that's
I
awesome.
run
I
away
love
for
it.
the summer.
Yeah. And I think readers love to know some of these kinds of things too, how that all ties into our books. And I know you have your Highland series, and I'm half Scottish too. And so there you go. It works out well. Um, so I have a little bit of a concern about what's happened with historical romance in terms of publishing. And uh, you still write the same. I know you both write other things as well. But when we look at historical romance books that you've written and that other best-selling authors have written, they're still the same wonderful books that they've always been. And it's a genre that's been very popular for a very long time. And yet in publishing, they're not publishing as many historical romances. And I know that Harlequin, for example, has stopped publishing historical romances. What what do you think is going on there? What are your thoughts about that? Is that their mistake, or is it they're just following market trends that and it's a logical thing to do, or do you think they're making a mistake? What's going on?
Oh, I have lots of thoughts.
Well, let's hear
You go first, Celeste.
them.
This is a topic of conversation that I've had a number of times. I've given a couple of seminars on it, actually. And, you know, the reality is multi-pronged. Um, the readership that we have is diminishing. There's a natural attrition to all readers. And it just so happens to be that the age demographic that right now is predominantly historical romance readers is on the older side. I have data that shows the it's somewhat extrapolated, but the data that shows the potential loss of revenue that our genre took post COVID. I looked at several markets and looked at the
Oh,
morbidity rates, and it was very, very significant. We have, readers who are Gen Y and older who grew up with a particular type of stories, third person past, and that's what we always read. That's what we're comfortable with. And then you have millennials, and then particularly down from there that started reading more first person present, first person past. That's a reading style that many of them prefer. That's not the norm for historical romance at this point. So you have a couple of different things going on there. And Harlequin, I think, made a business decision that is a reaction to those two big factors, among other things. But we're in a stage as authors and as business people where we want to continue to provide the stories that our current audience loves, but we do need to be thinking about how do we, meet the demands of our, for lack of better term, cash cows, versus or in addition to writing stories that are going to appeal to these custom designer dog audiences that we want to pull in. And it is very difficult to balance those things when inherently the two styles are quite different. Third person past and
mm,
first person present, or even third person present, has a very different vibe to it. And there are a number of current readers, because I've pulled them, I have colleagues who have pulled them, that are not opposed to the idea of first person present or past in historical, but the bulk of the readers that we have want what they're used to, and that's very understandable. That's why they're loyal to that genre. So it is a difficult time of transition for us, and figuring out what will modern historical romance look like, and not just the tenses, and the POVs, but also the content of it. There is a lot of misperception that the stories that are being written now are the same type of storytelling that your mom, your grandma, your great grandma, whomever wrote. And there's, a lot of us who are writing historical romance now that are not perpetuating misogyny, are not perpetuating the patriarchy, that are writing diverse stories that are very historically accurate. We know more now than we did in the past, and we're able to incorporate that into our stories. But readers who are not currently fans of historical romance don't realize that. There's a particular TV show that has done very well and that has brought some people over to read the books, but those are
Bridgerton?
folks who, yes, those are folks who never intend to read any other historicals than those. There are
Mhm.
those who read them and are like, wait, this really doesn't match the book. And so if this is what historical romance is, this isn't my jam. And then there are those that are like, oh, let me look and see, the historical romances that are similar to this. And they read very good historical romances, the classical ones, but again, they're not seeing what's coming out these days, and their wants and needs are not necessarily being met by some of those classic histroms.
Okay, so I have a question for Lauren about that, but what I want to get to after that is how can we change that perception that readers have about what they think historical romance is that isn't necessarily accurate today? But Lauren, do you have anything first to add to what Celeste said?
Yeah, so I echo everything Celeste said. She hit basically all of my points. The only thing I would add is just having been in the trad side of publishing, back like 7 years ago, I got to kind of see what I call kind of the ugly side of how they make business decisions. And so I think that the biggest death knell on historicals was when New York walked away. And normally I don't think New York is a really high powered moving force when it comes to things. But if they make a statement of pulling all of their titles out of the stores, because that was the biggest thing I was hearing from readers, which my books are not in print in Barnes & Noble. They're available in print on Barnes & Noble online. But my readers, I share a lot of trad readers with big traditional authors, and they would go in and they would say, there are no books. Where did all the historical romances go? They're all gone except for basically Julia Quinn. They're all gone. What's going on? And they were asking me, and I said, well, here's the thing. All of those spots on Barnes & Noble shelves cost at least $150,000 per book. So if you see one copy of a Julia Quinn book, it's $150,000. And that was like several years ago. It's probably more now. And so readers don't understand because they're like, why don't you get your books in a bookstore? I'm like, those spots cost a ton of money. And so if New York thinks they can't sell those books, Barnes & Noble will actually, I hate to say this, they'll blacklist authors if they do not sell their stock, and the stock has to be returned. And I know this personally because one of my really nice friends, Rachel Kane, who's now gone, she died from cancer a couple of years ago. She was a New York Times bestseller multi times over. And she told me how Barnes & Noble, and I love Barnes & Noble, I'm not dissing them, this is just how their business works. They will blacklist you if you don't sell, and they will never stock you again. And she didn't sell out of her, they ordered too many copies, Barnes & Noble did, made a bad decision. And then she didn't sell out because they overpurchased, and then they punished her for it, and they never stocked her again on any future releases, even though she would continue to hit lists. So you have the bookstore mentality, and then you have the New York publisher mentality, and they clash sometimes in a really negative decision. So what happened was New York said, readers are dying, readers are getting older, younger readers don't like third person. And I have so many thoughts about that because I love third person. And I think first person has its place in time, but it's so limiting in the beauty of what you can actually do. Because if you have for example, a scene of a villain and you never name the villain, right? Because that scene is supposed to be mysterious and he's lurking in the shadows. But in first person, you have to label all the chapters of who people are. If you have more than one point of view to make the story rich, and you're over there going villain, 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 because you can't name him, So I think it's not that I hate first person, but it's so limiting. And I think it's really sad because I've had, readers come up to me and just say, it hurts my brain to read more than one point of view that I don't understand. And I'm like, that's scary. We're seeing it's kind of like nobody reads, the old Jane Austens all the time. We used to read Dickens and Jane Austen and how different that language is from now. And our books are technically watered down versions of theirs. And now the next generation is going to have our watered down versions even more. And I see that trend, and New York has seen that too. And they're picking up anything that they can buy that they think will sell. And so what they typically do is they'll buy brand new authors who have no street cred, and they hope those authors will blow up overnight. And then they'll buy big name indies who've already done all the hard work themselves and already set up their entire, thing, but then they'll throw enough money at the indie to convince them to come over to the publishing side, because the publisher's like, maybe we can just get a little bit more money out of that indie author. Whether they do or not is dependent on what happens. But nobody looks at the authors in the middle. So I'm like a mid-list author, and publishers, rather than saying, these people already have an established audience, they just need a slight push to be even bigger, New York goes, no, we don't want to do that. We don't want to waste time on, established authors that just need a little push. They do these two extremes. And I think that's what you see with New York, is extreme reactions to everything. So if they think historicals are no longer selling, what do? They put it in a coffin and they nail it shut, which I find very, very distressing, because I keep seeing readers over and over again still going, are you still going to write historicals? And I'm like, yes, I promise I will never stop writing historicals, but I do have to occasionally write these other kind of books to see if I can hit big with something else, because our incomes have dropped. I mean, my income 3 years ago is 70% down from what it used to be. That's huge. That's like, I can't pay my bills some months, huge. So, something's happening in the market. And with AI coming in, I think too, another problem was the AI market was heavily targeted. They targeted historical romances first. And I think it's because there were fake author mills that for years have been putting out Regency romances and Victorian romances and Highlander stuff like that.
Yep.
Yeah. And so it's hit like all the, the subsets of the historical market. And now those bad actors who are taking advantage of KU and getting bonuses with all these fake books and fake authors, they are now able to put out even more product. And people who were even stopped before that are now using AI. And AI really hit the historical romance hard. And I think that's been challenging. And I also think, I know this is like a tough thing to say, but from what I've heard of other readers too, is that a lot of the younger authors within the last 2 to 3 years that are starting to write historical romances, the quality of the historical accuracy is not there. So, I mean, I like to say that I'm somewhere between Julia Quinn, where it's like window dressing. The historical thing is, she says it's like the window dressing, her words, not mine. But I kind of like that, where it's like, you're in a historical setting, and I try to keep it as accurate as possible. But at the same time, I do want you to feel like you're having some fun and going on some adventures. And but you don't want to use door handles. You don't want, doorknobs when they weren't existing. There's just, and I think some of these newer authors, that's the problem with the indie mindset. And I love being indie because I'm fully indie now, but some of these authors don't take the time. You have to research. You can't have a Ford Model T in a Regency romance. That I've seen that happen. I don't know if that was an AI book or not, but I saw
They're
it.
a little elastic with their history.
Yeah. And readers care about that.
Put it. They're elastic.
Yeah. And so I think readers care about that. And I think that has not helped the genre situation. So.
Well, and just a quick note about that before I get to my other question, was that an example of that is recently I kept seeing this author who was a best-selling author, and I couldn't find her picture anywhere, which should have been a clue. But her books were selling really well, and they're comparable to mine, which are historical. And so I started reading one of her books that was set in the same place where mine is set, where there are no cars, and she had cars. They were getting in their cars.
Mackinac Island.
And I went, they didn't have cars. I mean, she didn't even say like the cart. So you got maybe the idea that maybe there was a horse there. And just over and over, they got in the car. And then when one of them took a cell phone out of their pocket, and and I was just, and it was the year was 1900, and I was okay. So then I got it that this was a farm or AI, one of the two. And
Yeah.
I've been trying to find her because I was putting together a group of authors for a retreat, and I thought she might want to come, but apparently she's never going to be able to come. So, so my
Yeah, and I think,
question, what's
well, I
that?
was just going to say, I think there is a difference between creative license and just a disregard for historical accuracy. And so I think it's fine when you have sort of the window dressing history and there's some creative license there, but when it's inherently inaccurate, then it becomes a turnoff to those current readers. But
Right,
it also doesn't draw people in because these idiosyncrasies, you know, are quite blaring. And so when
right.
you encounter that frequently when you're trying out a new genre, then you think, well, if this is the way it is, then I want nothing to do with it.
That's a really good point, Celeste. And so, what is it that we as authors can do to inform potential readers, to invite them into our world of historical romance? What is there anything that we can do? And if so, what do you think it might be? How could we make it work? Because they're still valuable, good, entertaining, wonderful, I mean, heartwarming books. And so there's no reason for them to have been banned or set aside. So what do you think?
I mean, I think it's very challenging as somebody who spent 15 years in grade school classrooms and has been out for going on 5.5 years. Um, I can tell you that when I taught literature as well as history, there was a very significant shift away from reading the classics to reading more contemporaneously published books because it was buy-in for the students, that it felt more engaging to them. And so to get them to read, we needed to pick the things that they would like. And it's like, well, I understand that, but don't, don't discredit the value of literature. And so
Right.
we're facing generations, at least, in the US, where they are just not brought up with the same historical context and text that we were. And so I think it's really important to be able to show them these are the things that we recognize that you enjoy about the genres you read now. You can, in fact, find them in historical. That the perception that you have that maybe you started out reading historical because you read your mom and your grandma's books, but you moved away from it because it felt unrelatable or out of touch to you. Come back, try the ones that are being written now. These are being written by authors who are having a lived experience similar to yours, and those sorts of things are getting incorporated into the books. And that, again, like I said before, we have more access to accurate history, so our stories are far more diverse because that is the reality of past time periods. And as somebody who writes contemporary mafia, I tell those readers, if you love guns and suits, you can love swords and kilts because mafia is just modern day medieval. And then I flip it around and say, if you love, swords and kilts, you can love guns and suits as well. And trying to draw those parallels for readers to say, these are the tropes that you like, these are the themes that you like. Here's how you can get it in both. Plus, this is my voice. If you like the way that I write and the voice that I have in this particular genre, then you will find that voice in this other one. You just have a different time period, like, whether it's swords or guns or horses or Lamborghinis, like, you still are going to get lots of action. You're going to get lots of blood and guts and a lot of sex in my books, regardless of what time period. So everybody should come out with a happy ending one way or another by the end of the book.
So I hear you saying you're building a bridge,
I
and
try to.
yeah,
I
and you're
really do.
we've got these
Um,
two different things, and you're bringing them together for readers. I love that.
and I know for me, at least, Lauren, I think you said that you write under the same name. I chose to write under two different names for marketing purposes, but it's never been a secret that Celeste and Sabine are the same person. We have the same last name. We have the same soft sus sound for both of those first names. Those were marketing and branding choices because I want readers to know that they can come and go between the two. And so where you find Celeste, you're often going to find Sabine and vice versa.
And Lauren, what would you do to entice new readers?
I basically kind of do what Celeste does. So I go to a lot of signings, and the only reason I didn't have multiple pen names at the time was I diversified early, and I had like a gothic thing that came out, and then I went into like billionaires and stuff. But I do have, multiple other pen names now that are more focused with what they do. But I always tell readers, oh, well, if you love anything that I write, you could read, and if you like anything the way Lauren writes, every Lauren book feels like a Lauren book. I always say it's my version of this, or it's my version of that, like my version of dragons, my version of vampires, my version of Regency rogues or Highlanders. Like I try to make sure that I understand that the reader, they will get the same type of sex scenes, they will get the same tone, the same kind of language style. I don't make my contemporaries less flowery than my historicals. It feels all the same, and that's why I kind of try to just do it, solicit, tell people like, hey, if you like this, you'll probably like this. And I always do like sticky notes at my events where I'll put like on, my books, I'll say like, love Bridgerton, try this, love Fourth Wing vibes, try this, like, and it kind of gets people into different books. And I try to, entice them with tropes. And this is a new thing I didn't know was going to be a thing, but blind date with the book has been very successful for historicals, because normally I don't sell historicals at all at these events. Like they want contemporaries, they want the billionaires, they want the other shifters and stuff like that, and vampires. And I put maybe 10 to 15 blind date with the books out. Half of those will be historicals and they will still sell. And I put clearly it's historical. And I can't believe that. So I think that readers, if you just have a conversation with them, and whenever readers post in groups asking for recommendations and they say, I'm looking for this kind of book, I'm like, I write that kind of book, and a lot of times I'll be in like modern contemporary groups and they're like, I'm looking for this kind of hero. I'm like, well, if you don't mind historical, because if they say that they don't mind it, they're like, any genre, I try to pitch those books, and I have found it's a small, like one-on-one battle every time, but I'm like, I'll win them over one at a time, but I think it's just being honest and talking to the readers and saying, it's not what you think. It's actually really fun. You should try it. And I've had like men try my books because like they'll come to like workshops or something and they'll hear about the book and they're like, well, it's got Sherlock Holmes, you said? And I said, yeah, he's a really fun side character. You should totally read this. And they read it and they're like, okay, that was really fun. How did I not know romances were fun? I'm like, because society tells you that you should like them as a man. So I think it's just being out there and being brave and just continuing to have those conversations and talk with the readers.
I would love to see us bring back an understanding of what historical romance is and an understanding of the very kinds of things that you've been talking about to entice new readers. And I think they'll be surprised, really surprised at how much they can enjoy what they are. Well, I have one final question for you, but before we get to that, as we start to wrap up, I want to show you this is my very first ever historical romance that I read. And I don't know if you can see that very well.
Mm-hmm.
Love for All Time by Beatrice Small. And I read this in 1986 when it came out. And I was hooked, I have to tell you. And so it's right on the front. It says a sensuous adventure, and I was all right. and so I think what a lot of people don't understand is they think that the stories are going to be misogynistic, and it's usually just the opposite. That they're
Mm-hmm.
usually strong women, and even though the men are involved and the hero, the man may even save the woman, it's generally because she is a strong woman in one way or another that it all turns out that way. And I think people are going to enjoy these stories so much more than they realize. So,
I just wanted to chime in about that, and I think one of the things that contemporary historical romance writers are trying to show more and more of is the reality of it is that you could not be an absolutely insipid, too stupid to live woman in these various historical time periods when you had certain responsibilities and
Right,
duties. For me, writing medieval, if the husband, the brother, the father, the whatever, all rode out to battle, and you have no idea if they're coming back, and
right.
you have an entire castle and village to run, you cannot be too stupid to live. If all the men folk in your life have left for the Napoleonic Wars and you are responsible for a household and you don't have a father or brother or whomever to take care of it, you had to budget and take care of servants. You just could not be insipid about it. And so there's this belief that that's what a lot of historical heroines were, that they were inept or unable to take care of themselves. And that is sort of the lens that some of the classic books were written in, because that worked with what the culture was at the time that they were written. But again, the ones that are being written right now, you might have a damsel in distress, but she's working to save herself as along with the hero or whomever. And I think that's an important thing to note.
And that reminds me of something, Lauren, that I heard you say one time, and you said the woman may get saved by the man, but she gets saved because she deserves it.
Hmm.
And I thought that was a great way to put it. That's so true. And Celeste, you're reminding me of. Have you ever heard the phrase? Uh, it's individuation and it's grandiose individuality.
Hmm.
And what that means, a psychological phrase, and what that means is that we all have a tendency, the grandiose part of it is, we have a tendency to think that we're the only ones that have
Hmm.
experienced something, like women today thinking we're the only ones that have ever been smart and the only ones that have ever been strong. And you just pointed out that's absolutely not true. It's not possible. We wouldn't even all be here if that were
Yeah.
true. If women
And that's actually a phrase that not a whole lot of people know, but it is one that I'm familiar with and is at the root of a lot of the books that I write, and why I think readers appreciate that, because they realize in historical romance, these themes, these experiences that we have today are not new. We say
right.
history repeats itself for a reason. And so those who are giving historical romance a fair shake, a fair chance, do discover these resonate with me because these experiences are shared across time, across location.
I love that. I love it. And so, as we wrap up, is there anything you would like to have readers know? It could be your existing readers who may see this, or potential new readers who would see this. Uh, for example, what else are you writing? Where can they find you? What else would you like them to know? Lauren?
Well, I want to echo what Celeste said about, I think she and I can both say, based on what she talked about with her heroines, that if you want to try our books, we promise to deliver these heroines that are smart, because women didn't get our rights today and what we have today because we sat back and we were stupid in the past. It's because women have been fighting tooth and nail since the dawn of time to get to where we are. And I think she and I write very similar in that we have these heroines who, yes, they can be, innocent, and they can be, naive in some ways, but they're going to be smart, they're going to be compassionate, they're going to be brave. And I always promise to write compassionate, brave, intelligent heroines. And I do promise that, my men, there's none of the heroes are ever misogynistic. Like, they can be broody, they can be alpha holes, as we talk about, but they are never in the direction of being verbally harmful to the heroine. They're never disparaging, they're never misogynistic. They're usually just dealing with their own trauma that just makes them grumpy to everyone or broody or, and I think so. That's what I would promise, is that try our books, because they will give you what you're looking for. It's just not what you expect based on what other people may have told you about historical romance.
That's wonderful. Celeste?
I echo those things, and in my books, I always say, welcome to wherever it is, the Highlands, the Vikings, the pirates, where the men are strong and the women are fierce. These are women who are independent because duty puts them in a position where they have to be. And these heroes realize that they are better off for the women in their lives. I write very much us against the world. My couples often get together earlier in books than in a lot of other romances in general, because they are always faced with some type of an external challenge where they may have their own issues, you know, within themselves and between each other, but the outside world is forcing them to come together and work together. And for me, I really can say that whatever book you get, whether it is a Celeste book or a Sabine book, the themes that are the backbone of the books are always the same. If you picture a wagon wheel, the hub is, family, and the spokes are love, honor, loyalty, and duty. You will get those in every single book that I write. Those are personally important themes and values to me. And so I think that comes out in my stories, and you see these couples that are in it for the long haul. Oh, and I don't write third act breakup because I write chunky books. And I figure if you get to 300 pages and you haven't figured your stuff out, you'd probably get a divorce in real life. So there's no third act breakup in my 400-page books. They might have some issues early on, but by 300 pages in, trust me, I am as invested as you are.
That's great. That's great. You know what both of you have just done? I've read books by both of you,
Oh,
but I've
thank
not read
you.
them all. So you've just convinced me I have to go find some more and read some more. Well, thank you so much for being with me today. And I want anyone who's watching to know that I'm going to put the links to your websites in the description for this video so that they can make sure to find you. And I've just absolutely loved this conversation. It's so near and dear to my heart. So thank you for being here. And I'll read some more. Bye.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank
Sure.
you.
Bye.